The reality is parenting is the toughest job you're ever going to do, and there's no qualification. And I think there's so much of parenting, but equally, just being a human being is about actually learning how to sit with difficult emotions and work through them. And we're not taught how to do that. That's what I'm trying to teach children, is how do we work with difficult feelings rather than suppress or deny or make up stories about ourselves that are not true.
What's different about you and your approach compared to how the parents are trying to approach it?
What I'm trying to teach parents is, first of all, help them understand what's actually going on in their child's brain and why their child is not listening or misbehaving. Because we have to understand that our children, their brains are still growing and evolving. So things like frustration tolerance, controlling my emotions, flexibility, adaptability, to see things rationally. Often parents will say, I don't even get why they're getting so upset because they're drinking from the blue cup instead of the green cup, like it doesn't make any sense. All of those things, that's down to those executive functioning skills, which our children don't yet have. And us as adults with our fully functioned developed brain, we need to be that substitute prefrontal cortex for them.
What advice would you love to give them?
I think definitely focus on that internal chatter and start to be your own inner champion. You don't need to know all the answers. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, and you are learning with your child as they grow. And one other thing that I also want to touch on is
Welcome to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we help mentor you into becoming a more successful version of yourself. We do this through giving you access to mentors you typically would never have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their experiences, their life-changing events, their fields of expertise, and most importantly, their purpose. My name is Harry Goldberg, husband to an incredible woman, father of two amazing daughters, host, interviewer and interrogator of this podcast, and director and advisor and meditation teacher of Purpose Advisory. This purpose-driven project is entirely funded by Purpose Advisory, which I am a director of. We guide clients to make great life and money decisions, and we do this through a range of different services: life vision experiences, personality, investment strategies, cash flow systems, and through teaching meditation. If you want to learn any more about any of these, link in the comments below. Now, just before we learn from yet another exceptional guest, if you find value from these conversations, please make sure to like and subscribe below, leave a review. It really does make a difference. And of course, share it with someone else who's going to find value. Now, listen in, pay attention, take some notes, enjoy. Let's begin. Natalie Costa, welcome.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation. All right. Okay. So for the listeners, you started out as a school teacher in 2007, continued teaching till 2012. You even did some, I think, fitness instructing throughout.
Yeah.
And then, so in 2012, you became a confidence coach for women, tapping into their potential. And then since 2015, you've been empowering parents and children from as young as 5 to, and I quote, tap into the power of their minds and deal with troubling emotions. So before obviously this conversation is going to focus a lot on our own mindset and on how to be a better parent and how to deal with our kids' emotions and all that type of stuff. But before we get there, to the extent of success that you've already achieved, how do you define success?
Good question. And I think for me, success is, well, it's twofold. It is about making an impact. And that I see a lot, in terms of the work that I do with children, really helping them begin to recognize that I don't have to believe all the thoughts I think or respond to everything I feel. And selfishly create, giving children what I wish I had learned from a much younger age. So for me, it's the impact that the ripple effect that starts to create when families and children start to embrace these tools, these strategies. But then for myself, success, I think again, it comes back to giving back, that impact factor. But also knowing that like the freedom to do what I want to, that I'm really good at what I'm doing, and also the freedom to be able to do that. I think for a long time I felt quite stuck in certain roles, and I didn't feel like I could create the changes that I wanted to create. And through a lot of a lot of steps, a lot of hard work, but we are here. And I think for me, that is success. And then obviously, ultimately seeing the impact that that has on children and on families.
Okay, so there's this element of being able to have the freedom to get good at what you want to get good at, and then to be able to do
Mm,
what you actually love doing, so that you can
yeah.
then see the impact as a result of the actions that you've taken,
The impact on other people's lives. Yeah. And
the
the
impact
ripple
on others'
effects that
lives.
that creates. Yeah.
So then, so how do you know that you've been successful? How do you know that if you fast forward 20 years, how do you know that you've lived a successful life?
Um, I think the word that springs to mind is fulfillment. My work is incredibly fulfilling, um, because I have families come back and I see the changes that take place within children when they just learn something that they don't know about their brain or about their emotions or how they can perceive their challenges in the different ways. It's almost like those little light bulbs go off, and it's like, oh, but it's not my fault. There's nothing wrong with me. This is actually my brain's way of keeping me safe, and this is why I do what I do. So those sort of mindset shifts that they have, that's incredibly fulfilling. And it doesn't take a lot to create. I mean, obviously there's a lot of, habitual practice and so forth, but in terms of the initial, oh, but it's not about me. I'm not alone in how I feel, and here are some things I can do to help me work through those feelings. And so seeing what comes out on the other side of that time and time again, that's incredibly fulfilling. I mean, just the other day, I had a call with a mum, and we've been working together for about 3 sessions. And she said to me, she's like, I think I've got it. She's like, you've been trying to tell me to allow the feeling. And that's what I did yesterday with my daughter. She had this big meltdown, and yes, it was hard, but instead of me trying to fix or problem solve or get rid of it, I just sat with her. And actually, the connection that came from that afterwards was huge. And she's like, I'm getting it. And now that to me is okay. I'm creating these changes. I'm making things, I'm helping them. Again, if I think of my journey, it's always been about service and helping. Um, and so that, and I appreciate, like, there is no, I don't have any magic wand. And I appreciate, different modalities and strategies for different people. But I think at the end of the day, that sense of fulfillment, like I did the best that I could do, and I've created some, I've really helped create some positive change in this world. That's amazing.
In terms of then measuring the success, I mean, that's obviously looking back at your life, going, okay, great, my life
Mm,
has been successful because I've done these different things. What happens when you stop helping parents, or stop helping families? So what happens when AI actually takes over your role and can teach parents how to manage
yeah,
emotions better than you can?
yeah, interesting indeed. I think in terms of, so that would be work success, personal success. And this is something that I've really been reflecting on the last couple of months as well. Um, because I do have a tendency to work a lot. It's like, right, let's work. It's at that type A, let's go for it. There's a lot of unconditioning I'm still doing. And it comes back to, it sounds so simple, but it's so important. It comes back to being present with the people that matter in my life. And I mean, I think I was on a run earlier this week, and I was thinking, on my deathbed, nobody's going to say Natalie's worked so hard in her life and well done for working so late. It's going to be the people I've spent time with, the presence that I had. And this, I mean, I'll be honest, is still an ongoing journey, and it's something I think I've spoken about before, quite openly, in terms of learning just to be more present with the people that matter in my life, the people that are important to me. Because there is, initially, when I first set on this journey, there was very much, like I think many of us get caught up in, of work, 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 work. And actually, the people in my life right now, and my family, they're not going to be around forever. And so looking back, and this is a question I asked myself earlier this week, of looking back, I don't want to be one of those people that said, oh, I should have worked less. So it really is a balance. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have the magic pill yet to that. So it's something that I'm still having to learn in terms of and it's so conditioned as well. I think this thing of work hard and let's get that next thing, let's get that next thing. I'm very consciously aware of it, but yet inherently you're still you're trying to unlearn old patterns and old behaviors. Um, but from a personal perspective, success is just, was I present with the people that mattered the most to me? Because at the end of the day, and of course, I mean, other things as well. Freedom is important. Travel is important. I love the sense of travel. Like that to me, obviously, bringing more travel in and having the freedom to do so and being able to work from anywhere in the world. That's a big part of what I set up to do working for myself. But it's the relationships around you that matter the most as well at the end of the day. Um, so I think, those are some things that I've really been reflecting on myself. I mean, my version of success might change in a few years' time, but for me, it's the relationships and this connection and really being present in the moment with the people that I'm with.
Beautiful. Okay, cool. Well, let's dive into your journey, especially given you've just referenced it as well, that it's been
Yeah.
changing throughout your journey and you're still learning. Uh,
Yeah.
if we explore your life ultimately, like sometimes people just want to focus on their careers, and that's fine. But I'd love if you actually shared with the listeners, as a mentor for our listeners, kind of where you came from, what your upbringing was like, and then you can gradually get onto career and when you got married and all that kind of stuff as well. But do you want to start sharing a bit about your journey? Where did it all begin
Yeah.
for you?
Sure. Where it all begins, I began in a little town in South Africa, Pretoria, the capital. It's, so my mum's South African, my dad's Portuguese. I've got a younger sister as well, 5 years younger. And we had a lovely upbringing. My mum stayed home, my dad would work, a lot of privileges. But I think I always had this desire to go overseas. And I think that obviously was something my dad kind of instilled in us because we had family in Portugal. So we'd often, go over and see family. And I think, coming to secondary school as well. So I was a very typical straight A student, or trying to be a straight A student. I mean, school wasn't easy for me. I think I found learning quite difficult, but I was able to get good at it. But it's not something that naturally became easy to me. And definitely the classic thing I think we see with so many children of like, my success is defined to those marks that I get, those scores that I get. And of course, my parents loved me, but it's like do well at school, da 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 da. I mean, we know so much more now in terms of how we should be motivating our children. And but a lot of the emphasis was on get good grades. And I was also quite shy. I definitely wasn't a very confident little girl. People pleaser is, the classic good girl. Let's not make a noise. Let's not speak up. I think, and I can see that with some of my clients, children that I work with. But when it came to about secondary school, and obviously towards the end of secondary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? Have no idea. And I think that's such a big question to ask a 16, 17, 18-year-old as well, who's got no, concept of the big wide world out there. I mean, 18-year-olds now definitely do, but when I was 18, definitely not. And I remember still my mum sent me on these like, my parents were like, well, you have to go to university, you have to go to university. And I was always interested in human development. I was always interested in understanding the brain. But my mom sent me on these like EQ, IQ, aptitude tests, and back came this like computer generated thing of giving me some career options. And teaching was one of them. And so I thought, well, okay, it's a safe job. I like kids. I was also quite into art and creativity. So I did two art subjects up to my A levels. And I had this idea actually of, well, I could do fun art lessons with the kids. Fast forward, absolutely hate teaching art because it's just I'm quite
It's a
clinical.
mess.
I'm quite OCD, so it did not go down well. I remember thinking, okay, I'll do this because this is just what everybody does. You just go to university, you just do that next thing, never really questioning. And I guess my parents as well, because it's just what you did back then. You send your kids to university. Education is really important, and they've got to get a degree, get a good job. And but I remember my first year at uni, I really didn't. like it. I was like, I don't know if this is what's meant for me. I don't know if I'm meant to be a teacher. Yes, I love kids, but I don't know if this is it. So then I decided to, I was really fascinated, obviously, by psychology. And I was like, well, let me do a psychology degree as well and see, just see where that takes me. So for about 3 years, I did my teaching degree and then my psychology degree in the evenings. And I loved the psychology. At that, really, I was like, this is fascinating, like learning about the brain, different theories, and so forth. And then my teaching degree finished, and I could apply to do my honors in psychology, and so I did that, purely because I was afraid of going to get a job. I'm like, but now I've got to go teach, and I don't know if I want to go teach. But also, at that point, I was also like, well, maybe my route is become an educational psychologist. Um, so I did that for my 5th year, and then I was like, okay, we now need to get a job. So initially, I was exploring to become a nanny in the States because I had friends doing it and it sounded a lot of fun. But then I was also like, but I've got all this, like, got this teaching degree behind me, and a lot of South Africans at that point were coming to the UK. And I thought, well, let me do that, come teach for 2 years, and then I can come back to South Africa and do my masters and so forth. Let me just experience life a little bit,
What
and
year
in a
was
good way.
this, by the way?
This was 2005. I came over in 2006. I came over
Right.
initially
Okay.
in 2006. Um, and I remember as well, I couldn't apply for my master's in ed psych. The chances of being accepted was quite minimal. They sort of wanted you to get a bit of life experience. And I mean, I've been living at home up until this point. So I think it was about 2023 then. Yeah. So I came over to the UK, stayed with some friends. And yeah, I mean, teaching, it was a baptism of fire. Whatever I learned at uni did not prepare me for to teaching in a real, in school. And it was quite tough to adjust. It was quite difficult. But I still, like, I'm lucky that I've always listened to my intuition, and my guts just said, like, this isn't it. This isn't it. But at that point, I was like, well, what is it? What is it? And so then I went on this journey of experimenting, working with smaller groups of children. And I always said to my mum, I said, I love teaching kids, but I want to teach what I'm passionate about. And so I initially thought, maybe it's the 30 children that, it's like, it's too many kids. I want to get a little bit more intimate, smaller groups. But again, that just didn't tick the box. And I had a really bad breakup with a boyfriend 2 years. I was here for 2 years, and a really bad breakup, and I decided to go home for a few months. But I felt like a complete failure because I'd lost a lot of money. I'd lent him some money, and then he gave it back, and the money was stolen from my purse. It was awful. That summer holiday was awful. And I then decided to come home for a bit. Well, go back to South Africa for a bit. But I felt like an absolute failure. I'm like, I'm supposed to be earning pounds and saving money, and what am I doing? And then a friend of mine in South Africa said she's fed up. She's like, I want to go to London. And I thought, well, let me go back with her and I'll start again. And so that's what I did. And it then really was again a journey of different school environments and teaching environments. And fast forward, I got to a lovely school, but all the time, I still didn't, was like, yes, I'm good at this, but this is not what I want to do. And then I started to fall into the fitness world. I loved fitness. That was a release for me. That was excellent. It was those feel good feelings. And I remember being at a fitness class and being so inspired by the instructor, thinking, oh, I'd love to do what she's doing, but I teach about the gingerbread man and ABCs. Like, I don't have the confidence to stand in front of adults. I can speak in front of 5 and 6 year olds, but not in front of adults. But again, there was this little thing of like, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. So I do have this like inner voice that definitely does push me. And sometimes I have to learn to tone her down a bit because it can lead to not stopping. But I remember then exploring the fitness world, playing it really safe, becoming a kids fitness instructor. Then I did my exercise to music. And then I actually started to teach gym classes, but I was still teaching full time because I'm trying to figure out, what way am I supposed to be going? And again, that little voice was saying, yes, this is it, but it's not quite it. Is this what you see yourself doing for the rest of your life? Like, this doesn't seem like the solution. And the school that I was with knew that I was into fitness and so forth. And the deputy head came to me one day and she said, "Oh, there's this coaching course we found. I think it's PE coaching. You like your PE. Do you want to go on it?" And so she sent me the brief, and it was nothing to do with like PE. It was a taster to life coaching. But I absolutely was like, "Yes, put me on this," because it's obviously got all the psychology stuff. So I did that, and then I decided to train, get properly qualified in, performance coaching. But again, I'm still working full time because all of this is, you've got to pay the bills. And my thought was then, right, I'm gonna, because at that point I was, I was a bit, I was tired of the educational system. I was tired that I couldn't make the changes that I wanted to make. There's all these boxes you've got to tick and all of those things. And I thought, right, I'm going to leave education. I'm going to work with women making career changes. That's what I'm doing. I'm setting up confidence coaching. Bear in mind, I'm not feeling anything, but I'm not confident at all. I'm like, how do I do this? And I mean, I had some great clients in the evening, but again, I was like, that little voice, I don't know, I can't, like, that little voice is like, this isn't it. I mean, there were many tears. I'm like, well, what is it then? Like, is this just like a made up story? Like, what is it then? And it purely happened by chance, actually, because I was at school one day and I'd just come off a stress coaching CPD day about stress in the brain. And the year sixes, so those are the children that go from primary to secondary school, they were really stressed out about going to secondary school and the exams and SATs. And I was like, but let me tell you what happens in your brain when you're stressed. And when you know what happens, now let's look at what we can do to help you work through that. And I literally had these kids eating out of my hand that day. And I remember it was such a lesson. I just totally winged it. I was like, but that's my superpower. I'm really good at breaking things down. And I remember coming away from that thinking, like, I mean, I've got goosebumps now, but I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so good. Um, and that kind of led me on to a journey of exploring other things to do with children in terms of their mindset and their inner critic, and really exploring neuroplasticity, that we're looking at, what's happening in our brain when we make mistakes, and why mistakes are a good thing, that we shouldn't be afraid of them. Um, and so that really was the start of Power Thoughts. And my head teacher, bless her, she was so lovely because she knew that I was done with the system. And so at that point, I didn't have a full-time class. I was like the in-house cover teacher. So that was really good because that gave me the opportunity to put my program together and to try it out with different groups whenever, I was in the class, when
Or
the
like a
teachers had their
teacher is
planning
sick or
time.
something, or
Yeah, when the teacher's sick, and in the UK, like, your teachers here get half a day out of the classroom to plan and prepare. So someone like me needs to go in and cover the class. And I mean, it was a full-time role. I've been at the school for however long. So it was actually a great role because I didn't have all the class responsibilities, but you're still, still doing the teaching. And that got me to put Power Thoughts together. Because I also remember at that time when I started teaching children these concepts, I was like, well, maybe I can train somewhere to like be this kind of teacher for kids. And I remember looking at becoming a mindfulness instructor, mindfulness trainer, but I was like, no, but the stuff I want to teach goes a bit deeper than that. It looks at other things. And then a friend of mine at school, she's like, well, why don't you just start putting your own things together? And I remember thinking, but nobody's doing this. I can't do this. Like, nobody else is doing this yet. But that really did lead me on to putting Power Thoughts together. So I created, initially, it was a 6-week program, but I mean, that's completely like, there's so many different things that we cover now. Um, and then my plan was to, I initially started to reduce my days at school. So I went down to 4 days to 3 days. And the other days, I then started to reach out to other head teachers that I knew in other schools and would go in and deliver the program within their schools. Um, and then through that, I had one of my first private clients contact me from Australia. Um, because they'd read about me in the Telegraph, and he said, oh, we don't have coaches here for kids, but I really believe in, this was years ago, I really believe in coaching. And can you work with our son? And this was also before Zoom was a thing, because it was like, how do I do this remote online thing? But that really opened up a whole other door. Um, and then, yes, over the last few years, it's really evolved. It's not just about working with children, it's just as much about supporting parents. And now I do a lot of workshops in the corporate space as well, supporting parent networks, because the reality is parenting is the toughest job you're ever going to do, and there's no qualification. And it often, it can be the blind leading the blind sometimes, because how are we doing these things? And it's really, really hard. And I think, as you and I briefly spoke before this, but so much of parenting, but equally, just being a human being, is about actually learning how to sit with difficult emotions and work through them. And we're not taught how to do that. And that's what I'm trying to teach children, is how do we work with difficult feelings rather than suppress or deny or make up stories about ourselves that are not true. And also, but equally, it's about supporting parents as well, because we've not been given these tools or these strategies.
Mm. Amazing. Again, we're definitely going to dive into that and into your experience and like into your expertise there.
Yeah.
And just just before we dive into that part, I'm still curious. So you got your first client, who happened to be from Australia, reading a UK
Yeah.
telegraph, like you're reading a UK newspaper. It just happened somehow, and this was before Zoom or anything like that. And then, how did the business grow? Had you stopped your other work at that stage? Had you
So
stopped teaching?
I was teaching part-time for about 2 years. So gradually going down. Was it 2 years? Sorry, it's been ages now. I definitely cut down. No, I lie. I was teaching part-time for a year. So I went down within that academic year, I went down from 5 days to 4 days. And then I went down to 3 days. But we had no, I lied, it was 2 years. We had a new head teacher come. And towards the end of my second year, he said to me, I can't have you on 3 days anymore. You either come back into the classroom full time or you go. And that was like, okay, I now need to take the jump. I need to go into this full time. And it was really scary. It was really, really scary, because I also didn't see myself, what was I going to achieve by going back full time? I was like, I have to do this now. But what I also did as well is I was tutoring in the evenings as well. So just making sure, and so I probably did that for another year afterwards. Um, when I wasn't then teaching, I was doing power thoughts, but still doing a lot of private tuition. So that became the safety net. And yeah, then after the third year there, and then by then it was full time. So it was
Cool.
probably about a scaffolding of about 3 years. Yeah.
And that's cool. The reason I'm asking is there's often clients who come to us, or just people I
Yeah.
speak to in general. They don't like the corporate role they're in. It's good enough, but it's not fulfilling them, right? They've probably also got a similar
Mm,
voice in their mind saying this isn't quite it, and they're freaked out about making a jump, and they're hesitant to even start a side hustle because it takes energy, it takes time. You got to put effort in to make that happen, right?
yeah.
And a lot of the time, also for people who are in corporate roles where they're on a very significant salary, which they're being paid, and then it's you
Mm,
literally from a really high salary, you go down to zero or close to zero pretty quickly. Um, so I'm curious about what was going on in your mind as that was happening. So you were choosing to. I guess you had the flexibility at work to start pulling back
mm,
hours, and that reduced your
yeah.
pay a bit. But then you were doing some tutoring in the evening, and you built up that. It's kind of like building up a tutoring business to be able to fund
Yeah.
what you actually want to do. And
Mm,
then it kind of just got to a point where you're like, okay, I've got to make a big decision now. It's time to jump. But can you
yeah.
tell me a little bit more about your decision making process and also the practicalities of how you went through that? Because you've done it successfully. There are a lot of people who start a side hustle, it doesn't end up succeeding, and they're like, oh, it just didn't work,
Yeah.
and they go back to their corporate job, and they kind of accept it, or they're happier in their corporate job, or they just feel miserable, whatever. But
Mm,
uh,
mm.
how did you manage to do it successfully?
Yeah, good question. I think, I mean, it was, if I think about it, it was probably a 3 or 3.5 year process of going from the idea to full time doing power thoughts. Um, for me, some people can jump in, and like that fear factor is their driver. But for me, I'm the safety one. I need a bit of a safety net. And so I tapped into my skills of tutoring, and I also actually I did a lot of well, not a lot, but I still tapped into that that second and third year still tapped into the fitness instructing as well that I did. So I had like cover classes. I mean, there were days that were ridiculous. I'm not going to lie, especially that transition phase when I was a teacher. I was running Power Thoughts. There were days that I would wake up, I'd go teach a spin class in the city. I'd finish at 5 minutes before so I could get into the shower, so I could be at school. And then I'd go and see a tutoring client after school. And then there might be, either a coaching thing or another class that I cover. And that would be a good 2 to 3 days of the week. Now that's obviously also fueled because of like the scarcity mindset of where's money going to come from, but there was a lot of hard work and sacrifices on that, along that way. But I was prepared to do it because I couldn't. For me, I guess my why was big enough as well to keep me going, because for the first time I found something that I was really good at doing, and I knew it was making a difference. Like it was exciting me, and I could see the difference that it was making, and I was like, I have to follow the breadcrumb. I have to follow this. But it also, when the head teacher said to me, "You've got to come back into the classroom," my whole body shut down. It's like, no, it's like that. Like I was like, I have to do this. And then I also just think I did remind myself, worst case scenario, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work. Okay. But the plan B for me, I needed that. I can come back to teaching. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd kick and scream to go back, to be honest with you. That's not what I'd want to do. But I was like, I'm resourceful enough to know that I can figure this out. And if I don't do it, this is the other thing that kept me up. If I don't do this, what am I going to be thinking in years to come? Like to me, that just felt worse than anything else. Do you know what I mean? If I don't do this. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it was not easy at all because I'm more anxiety prone. I guess as a little girl, I was very anxious. Worrying is like a default, it's something I work on daily. Like, you get people that are very laid back and chilled out. I'm not like that. I'm like, okay, worst case scenario. And what about it? And I can easily catastrophize. So it's always a daily practice. So it absolutely did not feel comfortable at all. But I guess the thing is, for me, one of the big driving factors was if I look back, I'm really going to be annoyed. I can think of more colorful words to use there, but I won't. But I'm really be annoyed in terms of if I don't give this my all, if I don't try this out.
With hindsight, would you have made the same decisions? Like looking back now, especially on that 3.5 year journey, would you have still done tremendous hours of literally working 3 jobs in a day for 2 to 3 days a week?
Yeah, you know what? No, probably not. No, probably not. And I'd probably tell myself, don't worry so much. Like, take a breath. Like, because I think that's the other thing. It's this, okay, go, 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 let's go for it. Whereas actually it's more the tortoise approach, the slow and steady approach. I guess not that I have regrets, but the only thing I sometimes think about, but everything works out in the way that it's meant to, is I wish I had the idea to do this when I was a bit younger, because I think probably how old was I? 30. I mean, I'm 40 now, so it was in my early 30s. But I always like I wish I had this idea like in my late 20s instead to like make this jump. Like I would have had this like track, like this foundation behind me. But I totally appreciate everything happens when it needs to happen. Yeah, so that's that. But I think looking back, I definitely would have told myself, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Okay, so start as soon as you possibly can is the one thing.
Yeah.
Come up with the ideas
Yeah.
as soon as you can. Think about where you actually want to be as soon as you can,
Yeah.
and then just
And
start working on it with a longer time frame.
yeah, and I think try things out as well. Like try things out. I think for me as well, like when I became the fitness instructor, I really loved it. I really loved it. Like, but I couldn't see myself do that full time. And now I know why I did it, because that definitely gave me the confidence to feel more confident, presenting and doing things in groups with adults. That sounds so ridiculous, but I remember on that spin bike that night, I was like, there's no way I could speak to adults. Like, it was a real fear. Like 5 and 6 year olds, easy. Um, but that really gave me the confidence of like, of course you can. And it also proved to me I can do what I set my mind to. So that was a big thing. I remember using a lot. I'm like, well, if I could do that, I can do this, and that was another thing that kept me going as well.
Just as
Um,
well, you didn't have
yeah,
the idea sooner. You would have gone, I'm not going to go into
exactly.
fitness stuff because I've already got this
Yeah.
amazing, I've got this idea. I'm going to go do that stuff. Then you'll spend your life just talking to kids. I'll never be ready to speak to adults.
Yeah, exactly. You see, so that's how the dots join. That's the dot. They don't like, I think it's a Steve Jobs quote, I think. It doesn't make sense going forward, but when you look back, they do make sense. Um, and I now teach what I'm passionate about. So something that I used to say years ago as a student, I'm now doing. And that to me, that is just, I mean, it's just crazy how things are aligned. But yeah, I often think about that.
So, and throughout this journey, you got married. You didn't choose to have kids, did you?
Yeah, no, we don't have children, and we got married, and we've moved from London to a little town just outside of London. I'll be honest with you, I am a city girl. I didn't realize how much I miss the city. Um, yeah, I know, but I mean, I'm not far. I'm not far. I go in weekly, but it is just I think working for myself as well is it gets lonely. It gets lonely when you work for yourself. And I found that just living in London, there was a lot more local things and things, 5 minute walking distance from me that is not quite the same where we are now. Um, and I think yeah, the loneliness factor is a big thing. But yeah, so we've moved here, but yeah, one of our things is travel. We like to travel. We like to, and that's one of the things I love is the freedom to pack up and go and to don't have to think about anything, and I can just go and if I have to work from somewhere else, I can do that. A little bit harder because he's got a corporate job, so a bit more limited in terms of how often we can travel. But it is conversations we're often having. So yeah.
Why? So why did you move? Why did you leave the big city?
I think my husband wanted to move. He was more keen to move. His family's up here as well, so he was keen to move. And I mean, I was up for it as well. I was excited to do it, but I didn't take enough time, I think, to do the homework around. I didn't. It was also he also moved when I had it would kind of coincided with deciding to go full time into power thoughts as well. So leaving teaching and doing that. So I think I was quite excited. There were a lot of new changes, but I didn't actually fully comprehend what it would be like working from, a little town versus in the city. Um, yeah, so there were multiple factors there in terms of having to move and being closer to his family and so forth, which is great, which is great. I mean, like I said, London isn't far; it's a quick train ride, but it's just yeah, it's just a different vibe. It's a different vibe.
So from the point of time that you were full time with Power Thoughts, how did you really grow the business? How did you make it so much better?
Ah, yeah. Well, following the breadcrumbs, I think, following what was lighting me up. And I appreciate not everything in your business lights you up, but following, I do go to that. It's just following those little like yeah, following the breadcrumbs. So for me, initially, it was about going into schools, um, putting these programs together, going in, delivering these workshops, and obviously this is before pre-COVID and so forth. And really, like just the energy with the children was a different buzz. It was a different energy with children versus me being the class teacher. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I mean, it was hard work, don't get me wrong, but that was the one strand, and then from there I started to have schools say to me, can you deliver parent workshops or staff workshops? And so I was like, okay, well, how do I do this? Okay, because I'm so used to breaking things down for kids, but okay, let me build it back up for parents. um, and along coinciding with that, obviously, as I was doing school workshops, by then I also started to have more private clients contact me and, wanting to work with families with their children privately. Um, and that was again me working more with children and having a debrief session with parents initially. And then the year COVID, yeah, COVID 2019. 2019. Was it 2019? 2019, it was ages ago. But that year, one of my friends that works in the corporate sector said, "Oh, we've got this family network at our law firm. Would you like to come and do a parent workshop?" And I mean, I was scared. I was like, oh my God, all these lawyers, like, I work with little kids, like, this is really scary. But I did it and I absolutely loved it. I was like, well, actually, this makes sense because now I get to meet people in the day where they work versus after school at night when I'm tired and now I'm trying to deliver this talk to parents after school. Um, and so that's then obviously COVID helped a bit with that, I guess, in terms of all companies were remote and they wanted, to support more of their family, their parenting staff, because parents found it really difficult, during the COVID periods. And so did quite a few workshops for parents and children that of the corporate. So that was, and that really got me into this whole world of doing more to support, working family networks. And I realized there's a whole network of them, especially out here in the UK. I don't know about where you are. And alongside that, introducing more parent work with the families that I do. Because whilst we could see great results with children and children where, shifts were being created, but so much of it then also came down to, well, what are parents doing? How are parents modeling this? And how are parents looking after themselves? Because we're all learners on this process. And that's what I kept saying to parents, like, nobody's taught you how to regulate your emotions or work through your feelings. And I'm generalizing here, but it's this is new for us as well. So it will be difficult, just like it's difficult for our children, but how can we start do this together? Um, and so often as well, when I would be teaching children and going feeding back to parents, parents would say to me, I need this for myself. I need to be applying this myself. And that really is, that's where I'm at the moment in terms of supporting families as a whole, that everybody's learning together. And it's just as much about reparenting part of your own inner child as well, is just as important. And it's being able to sit with some really difficult feelings. And how do we learn to do that? 'Cause as we said before, it's not something that is taught to many of us.
Okay, so as we start diving into your expertise, then, uh,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions I suspect a lot of people have with you is, okay, great. So the parents like, I can't handle my kid anymore. They're just too emotional. It's too much. I'm frustrated. They're frustrated. They're crying all the time, or they're angry all the time, or they're not concentrating. They're not doing their homework. They don't have the behavior that I want them to have, or whatever. Right. Uh,
Yeah.
One of the first questions they might have for you is, well, how do you get their kids to listen to you? Like, what's different about you and your approach compared to how the
Mm.
parents are trying to approach it?
So what I'm trying to teach parents and is first of all help them understand what's actually going on in their child's brain and why their child is not listening or misbehaving, as in quotes. Um, because we have to understand that our children, their brains are still growing and evolving. So things like frustration tolerance, things like controlling my emotions, the ability to transition from one, for transition, flexibility, adaptability, to see things rationally. Often parents will say, I don't even get why they're getting so upset because they're drinking from the blue cup instead of the green cup. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But all of those things, that's down to those executive functioning skills, which our children don't yet have. And so we have to shift our perspective because it's so often a thing of, well, they're pressing my buttons, they're doing this on purpose, he knows exactly what to say. But actually, it's no, your child is actually really struggling right now in their experience, in the feeling that they're having, whether it is the fear, the anger, the disappointment, and they're feeling alone in that feeling. And so instead of them doing this to us, they're actually having a tough time in that feeling. And us as adults with our fully functioned developed brain, we need to be that substitute prefrontal cortex for them. And so it's about, first of all, meeting them where they're at initially. So it's first of all about helping parents shift that perspective of, actually, okay, this is really what's going on in my child's brain. It's the same thing as if I say to you, Harry, and assuming you don't have a pilot's license, I don't know, can you fly planes?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Don't
but
fly
it's the same
planes.
thing as if, okay, well, you never know, right? I've got to check. But it's the same thing as if I say to you, right, here's a plane, fly to France, and good luck, you've got half an engine. You're just not going to be able to do it, right? Because you haven't
Especially
developed a
especially
skill,
not from
and
Singapore.
especially not from Singapore. Yeah, good luck with that one. Good luck with that one, right? But you don't have everything there yet. And we have to understand that this is the same when children are struggling with these, these big feelings. And the other thing as well to remember is that, when we're triggered by their feelings, it also triggers something within us, because what did we want as that little boy and that little girl when we were their age and we were shouted at or shut down or whatever it is? It goes back, and what did we feel? And even when you're caught up in that power struggle with your child, what are you feeling under your anger? You're feeling misunderstood. You're feeling alone. And that's what they're feeling too. Except the difference is we've got a prefrontal cortex, and theirs is still in development. So that's one of the first things. Is really about the education piece, but coming from self-compassion as well, because it is so hard. It is so incredibly hard, and like I said, it's the hardest thing you're ever going to have to do. Like I really, I mean, there's some amazing jobs, but I think parenting is the hardest job, because you're responsible for this little being, and it's scary. um and so that self-compassion piece as well, because it's the guilt. I often work with parents, that's a lot of guilt that parents face, but it's my fault my child behaves this way, or I'm not a good parent, or what do the in-laws think of me because my child's running wild. um and actually that self-compassion piece of, no, but hold on, I'm a good parent and I'm learning as well, and this is new for me. It's and that I think is just as important, because we're not always very compassionate with ourselves. And this is something I'm learning too.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I've had some really cool guests on this podcast
Mm,
who have spoken very strongly towards what you're sharing. James Kirby is one of the first that comes to mind. All about
yeah,
compassion.
yeah,
Is one of Australia's leading academics, one of the world's leading
love it.
academics about compassion.
Yeah,
Very cool stuff. And we spoke a lot about being a parent, parenting with an audience, and
yeah,
uh, trying to have some compassion for yourself when everything is feeling so
mm,
hard. And then
mm,
Rachel Vecht and Julie King and Priya as well. They're all talking about
yeah,
basically parenting yourself first, uh,
yeah,
working on developing your own capacity that you're expecting of your kids,
mm,
even though your kids aren't ready for it yet, but you're expecting it of them.
yeah.
So at least start doing it for yourself first, right? Um, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the problems that a lot of parents are facing, and maybe even pick an example if you want to. You can
Mm.
choose a scenario and uh, basically work through how would you help a parent with that.
Yeah, I mean, a big one that often comes to mind is dealing with the tantrums and those big explosive emotions. And parents often, saying at the end, like, I don't know how to control my child. I end up shouting, everybody's yelling. That's a very common thing as well. And I think, there again, it comes, and I mean, and the other thing I will say that parents get in touch with me is, children being really anxious and dealing with the anxiety. Um, but if we're looking at the big emotions, it does start with, first of all, that education piece of helping them understand what's going on, trying to see the world through their child's eyes versus their fully developed brain. And the other thing as well that I spend a lot of time teaching parents on is, okay, how do we connect then in those difficult moments? How do we have that empathy and compassion, which is so incredibly hard to do? And I totally get it. We've got agendas, we've got to be places, we've got things to do. But how do I start to communicate with my child in a different way, where I can meet them where they're at first, before we look at the problem solving or the correction? And a big part of this as well, as I say to parents, is boundaries are absolutely key. We need boundaries. Children want boundaries. They might not show us or tell us that they want it, but boundaries makes them feel safe. So if we don't have boundaries in place, they never really know what to expect. So the boundaries do make them feel safe, but that doesn't mean they're always going to like the boundaries that we put in place, like going to bed or going to school. It doesn't mean that it's going to like that. And also to understand that having big feelings, expressing emotions is a normal part of child development as well. It's not about not having these big feelings. And actually, the main person there is, what am I doing to regulate myself, to sit with, to tolerate these own uncomfortable feelings myself, because my child's uncomfortable feelings makes me feel uncomfortable and it gets too big for me. And then that's where we get caught up in these power struggles. So actually, how am I building my tolerance level for my own uncomfortable feelings? Whether that is, okay, I'm going to sit with this meltdown, this tantrum, and I get it. I get it's incredibly hard. And you're not, and by the way, you're not always going to get this right, right? You're not always, because you're a human being. But also the uncertainty of, actually, I can't control my child and I can't fix it for them. How do we sit with that? It's incredibly uncomfortable. But it's also about taking stock of, what am I doing in those big feeling moments to regulate my own nervous system? What am I doing so that I'm staying calm? And that feels incredibly hard. But the reality is, a dysregulated adult cannot calm or soothe a dysregulated child, right? It's just not going to happen. Um, but on those days that it does as well, it's okay. I always say to parents, I always believe there's an opportunity for a do-over. So if you have, and I love the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel, we often talk about, flipping your lid. If you have flipped your lid, right, the next day or the weekend, let's talk about it. You know what, Mommy, sorry, I got a bit shouty. I flipped my lid and I got so angry that I didn't even think what was upsetting for you. And I'm sorry. Help me understand. Now, that in itself, the apology, we're owning what we've done, we're modeling what we would like to them to do, and we're also giving the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper as to understand what was actually going on. But yeah, so it's understanding, obviously, giving them a bit of an insight into understanding what's going on in their child's world. How do we start to connect with empathy and compassion through mirroring, through holding space for those feelings, and also how do we then, and the other part of this is teaching children some tools to begin to learn how to self-regulate. They're not going to do that from the get-go, but we were never taught how to self-regulate. So all of these breathing and mindfulness practices we're learning now, but if our children are learning this from a younger age, that's rewiring their brain in a whole different way. And then the compassion piece is so important. Of some days it's not about thriving through this. Some days it's like, you know what? I made it. I made it. And my child's behavior is not a reflection of me. I am a good parent. And this is tough. Like, of course, I'm finding this hard because I'm a single mum right now and I'm really struggling and there's a lot going on. Of course, this is hard. Why wouldn't this be hard? And I'm doing my best versus, I should be better, and all the negative chatter that we can get caught up in.
Yeah, look, there's a lot what you just shared in that, and
Yeah.
one of the examples which came to mind, there was I had to guess Henry Shukman. He's a Zen Buddhist teacher
Mm.
over in the US, and he grew up with
Yeah.
chronic eczema and anxiety and depression, and he actually healed it all through meditation. Either way, but
Yeah.
he's a very Zen kind of guy, right?
Mm.
And he was not always like that. And
Mm.
during the podcast episode, he had one of his sons interrupt him. Came through and interrupted the podcast conversation and like kind of asking something. The son didn't realize he was in the podcast episode. And when those things have happened in the past with other guests, you can see, not with all of them, but with some of them when that's happened in the past, you can see you can see the emotion that comes up for them, and then
Mm.
they don't handle it that well, and they kind of shut them up. Maybe they go and repair later. They probably do, but like kind of like they push away or whatever. And it's like, go away. I'm in the meeting. And he had none of that. I literally left the
Mm.
interruption in the conversation because
Love
we
it.
spoke about it later on. Because you can see, if you watch it, you can see in his face, like there was no anger or frustration or
Yeah.
fear or anything like that which comes up. And
Yeah.
like this is obviously attainable without becoming a Zen Buddhist monk, right? Like you can you can do this
Yeah.
without having to train and have monastic experiences and go to the other side of the world and being a poet and whatever, right?
Mm.
But it was a wonderful example of how powerful it is to just simply observe. And when
Yeah.
you're so in touch with what's coming up, it just it just flows through you, and then you're not having to react to it
Mm.
anymore, right?
Yeah. And it takes real practice. And one of the things, and it's also noticing where these emotions are in your body. And, that's one of the things that I do with children and adults, but it's like, okay, where do I start to notice this like anticipation, this stress, where is that in my body? And it's so uncomfortable to sit with it. And I appreciate, with many of the parents, but I've got an agenda. I'm tight on time. I've got to get out the door. We've got to get them to school. Or now they're having this epic meltdown. They're refusing to go to school, and that is really stressful. Um, and I mean, I might say something that's unpopular here, but uh, and it's hard. And again, like I said, we're not going to get this right all the time. But often the main thing that we need to do in terms of holding space for our children's feelings is we've got to drop our agenda. Because my agenda is I need to get there, I need to get there, I need to get there. But the more I'm trying to push, the bigger that feeling gets, right? Whereas if and like I suppose, that he just, okay, just drop it. My agenda here is talking to you, but okay, I'm just going to hold space for, my son coming in or whatever that disruption was. And actually, not, holding space for it, like just allowing it to be there, some of that resistance starts to go. And that starts to drop. Now, obviously, there are other things that we can do. I totally get morning routines, right? I don't want parents to be saying, oh, my, yes, but I've got meetings, X, Y, Z. I get it. What I also want to put in there is, and this, I'm not saying this is a blanket approach, but so often the things on our agenda, how important are they going to be in 5, 10 years from today? Right. And granted, some things are important. I'm not saying your meetings are not important. Of course, your meetings, of course, these things are important. But and this, like I said, it's not a blanket approach. But if we just, okay, do you know what? I might be 10 minutes late. Okay, but I'm gonna sit here. Okay, what is it? Tell me a bit more. Mirroring, taking that time just to connect. I'm not saying this is a foolproof way. None of this, by the way, is foolproof. I don't ever say that. But whenever because what our children are feeling most in those moments is alone in their feelings, and they're feeling overwhelmed by their feelings. So if we can connect and show them that we're with them, and obviously a lot of the stuff as well is what are we doing out of these moments to help us in these moments. It's not just what we do in the moment. But actually, do you know what? This is tough. It's so hard. I get it. And one of the dads I spoke to recently, he said what he's learning is the quick way is, yes, get your shoes on because I said so, da da da. How many of us were raised? I was raised like that, like out of that fear. But he said, what I've learned is actually, if she's in this big space, yes, it takes a lot from me. I've got to drop what I'm doing and sit with her. But actually, what I'm realizing is the more I'm sitting with her, the less these things are happening because she's feeling more connected. So it's the long way initially, but the long way becomes the short way. And by aiming for connection first, that helps you facilitate to be that prefrontal cortex as well. It's building that connection. Um, but don't get me wrong, but that's what I'm saying. It's incredibly, incredibly hard. And we have to make holding space for ourselves as well. Like, this is hard. But sitting with this feeling. And but I got a bit sidetracked with myself because there's one other thing I wanted to say is sitting with these uncomfortable feelings as well is noticing, one of the things that I do is helping children. And this is something you could do out of the moment. So not necessarily in that big feeling moment, but out of the moments about reflecting back on a time they had a big feeling moment, and then let's explore that feeling a bit more. What did that feeling feel like in my body? What shape was it? Was it heavy? Was it light? What color would you give it? I often get kids to personify their feelings. So let's create a silly character of this. What would you call one of the boys I worked with called his anger tornado? And him and mum would have so many conversations about tornado once they started this, about where he's feeling it. And it's just such a skill that we can begin to give children. Okay, what does tornado need right now? What's he trying to tell you? And we can use that for ourselves too with our uncomfortable emotions that come up as well. And this is a process. It's a process. And actually, when we sit and listen, it it actually, the resistance isn't that much. And actually, that's when it starts to, I don't know, de-escalate or dissolve. I mean, it's still there, but the intensity isn't that much.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you entirely. And there are some really cool examples which come to mind. I just want to share one. I rarely share this story, but
Yeah.
it feels relevant here because I want to inspire the people who are listening as well that this stuff works.
Mm.
And bear in mind as well, this stuff's not easy. I've been practicing
No,
meditation for 6.5, 7 years, and
so
there's and
hard.
different forms of it, and focusing on managing my own emotions and mindset. And I am a
Mm.
coach and I help people with this stuff, right? But I was presenting to a corporate setting to 70 employees, teaching about meditation, what meditation is, how you can apply it, mindfulness, all that kind of stuff. And my daughter, who was around 3 years old at the time, came was scratching on the door, like scratching on my office. She knew she was not supposed to come to my office. I'm certain that her mother had told her, like my wife had told her multiple times, do not go to daddy's office, do not go there.
Yeah.
Um, but alas, she came either way. Now, I was in the middle of talking about meditation and mindfulness, and I could have chosen to just ignore it. If I had just ignored it, she would
Mm.
have gone away and whatever, but she still would have felt like she's not connected to her daddy. So, once again,
Mm.
what's more important to me right now is that speaking to these 70 employees, I'm already adding enough value to them. It's a keynote speech, whatever, that's cool. But is that what's most important, or is it making sure that my daughter feels loved and
Mm.
connected and belongs? Like, the
Mm.
answer was pretty obvious to me. So I told them to I just asked them to just wait for one moment while my daughter's there. My wife has a newborn, trying to put her down.
Mm.
Uh, and so went over to my daughter and I'm like, you know that daddy's in the meeting. You really want to be with daddy right now, isn't that right? Are
Oh.
you happy to play on your own for a little while, instead of coming to my office? And then she was kind of saying okay, but you could see that there was some tears in her
Mm.
eyes. I'm like, okay, so she's not going to be okay with this. Got it.
Yeah.
And I could have still chosen to close the door and gone back to my meeting, but that just would have made it all the more worse. And maybe there would have been tears in the background as well, and that would have just been
Yeah.
even worse, right? Um, and so I said, okay, you can come in, but daddy's in the meeting, you can't talk. And throughout that time, I was exceptionally mindful. This is literally what I was teaching either way. I
Mm.
was exceptionally mindful of what was coming up
Yeah.
within me. I was mindful of what was the frustration, what was the fear, what was the worry,
Mm.
what was a little bit of anger, what was the stuff which was coming up. And throughout all of that, as while I was just being mindful of that, I just kind of reminded myself that everything's going to be okay. Like there was like from letting go of
Yeah.
the emotion, you don't have to tell yourself that everything's going to be okay. You just start having this knowing that everything's going to be fine. I
Mm.
had her; she was
Mm.
playing around with stuff behind me. And she eventually came on my lap, and that's fine. And she didn't make any noise except for once. And I just reminded her that that's okay, but uh, just for the next 10 minutes,
Yeah.
please just don't make any noise because then all of our friends here won't
Yeah.
be able to hear what I'm trying to tell them. And so she liked that, and then she sat on my lap and she watched, and uh, to not so much my surprise, but not to my expectations, a lot of people who are watching were like hashtag parent life, or yeah, that's just what happens. It's, I feel
Mm.
you. That's just what happens. Or wow, you're handling this so well. Or this is amazing. It turns out more people want to learn meditation as a result of that. Uh, as a result of that, and I'm like, well, next time I do a keynote, I'll just get my daughter to interrupt me because that'll be even better, right? Uh, but
Script her
there's
in.
so
So do this.
script enter. I'll press a button and then she'll come in. But like I'm like really though, like there's just so much power in being able to just let the emotions come through. Sitting
Yeah.
with your emotions and allowing them to flow through allows you to not even have to
Mm.
deal with so many of the negative emotions that your kids can have, because literally
Mm.
any negative emotion that shows up is something that can be like yes, negative emotion, or it can be like oh no, negative emotion, I'm going to run away from it and stuff it down or drink some
Yeah.
alcohol or whatever. um,
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I mean, it takes, I think, I don't know about you, but it does feel counterintuitive to sit with it, right? To notice it, because especially if it is uncomfortable, and if I'm thinking about, we've not developed the skill set yet, like especially if it's uncomfortable, it's like, no, resist, resist, resist. And but actually it's when, and it's funny, something happened yesterday and I could feel this anxiety bubble up inside me. Um, and like my worry, like, oh, but how am I going to sort this out? How am I going to deal with this? And I literally took myself upstairs. I lay on the floor And I was just like, right, where do I feel this? Okay, I'm feeling this here in my stomach. What color is it? It's gray. I literally would do what I'm doing with the kids, like, and I would picture it like being this like clay. It looks like clay. I'm like, right, that's like my anxiety. It's clay. And like and it was so funny. I closed my eyes and I just did this for 5 minutes. And I remember still thinking, there's a shift. It doesn't feel so intense. And don't get me wrong, like I said, after that, I went for a walk because I just wanted to get out of get out of headspace and like in the environment. And there was still some residue, but the times that I've done this, because there are still times, in terms of it's the default pattern is to react to the feeling. But whenever it's a practice, you say, like, just allow the feeling to be there. And like, that's what I often say to children, like, it's a feeling visitor. Your feelings are visitors. They come and they go. What's this visit? Some visitors hang around a little bit longer, but they come and they go. And it's so powerful when you can start to notice what you notice in your body, because that's the first thing, I think. And so many of us are not aware of what's going on in our body. We're so caught up here, and it feels uncomfortable in our body, and that's why I don't look at it, or I suppress it, or I react. And if you think about it, and I mean, I'm being generalistic here, but I see this a lot with, the parents that come to me, but the very, old school authoritarian style of parenting, when we had uncomfortable feelings, it made our adults feel uncomfortable. And so they would react because they didn't know how to deal with these uncomfortable feelings. And therefore we were shut down. Or not, and our parents, I'm not pointing fingers at our parents, like they did the best they could with the tools that they had. And things were very different. We knew so much less than what we know now. But so we have to know, like, we've just not been taught, I feel, as a society, how to sit with difficult feelings. And that sometimes we're not going to fix it on the spot. We're not going to get rid of it. We just have to sit with it. And that is a skill and a practice. And I mean, I love how you modeled that there, because you were holding space for her. And the default is to react, or as you say, shut the door, and that would have resulted in big tears and maybe big meltdowns, and then that would have been completely different. And obviously, then I can even feel like my stress levels elevating there if that was the response. Do you know what I mean? Um, but I think it starts with okay, if we're breaking it down, and I don't know, feel free to let me know what your thoughts are, but okay, what's going on in my body? Just tuning into what my body is telling me. How does this show up for me? Um, and then, bringing that more into a practice of, okay, can I sit with this for a bit? Can I breathe through this? That's often one of the things. Okay, let me just breathe through it. And often with, especially with like anxiety and, sometimes anger, but finding the alarm in your body. Where is the alarm? Where is it? Put your hand over it. Right, let's breathe into it. Let's just sit with it, versus the stories and the narratives that we get caught up in.
Yeah, we definitely get caught up with those narratives. I mean, ultimately, once
Mm,
I think the first step. Well, this is from what we teach. I teach meditation with one of my business partners who was a monk for 10 years, and it's amazing.
lovely.
Like, it's amazing what we're able to teach and the changes we're able to make in people's lives. So I share this not just from my personal experience, but from others as well. And
Mm,
it's amazing when you're able to do the very first step of literally just noticing that there's a resistance, like
mm,
noticing that something's not quite right.
mm,
So the difference between the reaction and, like, the difference between what happens and then how you choose to react or respond to it is based on how well, like, how much you're aware of it. Because it can, I was coaching a client just yesterday, and it takes, like, he was sharing how this was in a corporate setting, but same thing kind of
mm,
applies in other areas of his life as well. And he was sharing how he can kind of not get angry, 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 whatever. And then just within a few seconds, someone does it, and then within a few seconds, it kind of just takes over. It's just
mm,
there. And it's only a few seconds, right? Like that, like, it's just a few
mm.
moments.
It's like, yeah,
And the ability to be able to choose how you respond those few seconds later is based on how aware you are that that's even there. Because most people don't even realize it's there until afterwards. Like, what words just freaking came out of my mouth? What just
yeah.
happened? And
Mm,
what I've been able to find, or what I've found with clients and who have been teaching, is that recognizing that something's there and recognizing a resistance is the first step. and then
mm,
being able to choose to, as Henry Schuckman teaches, find loving, like find ways to really love and welcome and accept, like truly lovingly accept that resistance and
mm,
thank it for being there, because it's showing something that you really need, right? So just love it and nurture it. It's
yeah,
the resistance that's there that you got to see. All of this counterintuitive, right? Exactly as you've been talking
mm,
about. It's like doesn't make
yeah,
sense, but just by being able to love it and accept it and welcome it, well, then you're able to choose to let it go. But
yeah,
there's no point trying to say, I'm just going to let this go. Or I don't want to feel angry
mm,
right now, so I'm not going to feel angry. Stop making me
mm,
so angry. I don't want to feel it right
mm.
now, right? Like it just doesn't work.
No, no. And it builds and it builds and it builds. And again, but that's my thing. We weren't, this wasn't modeled or taught to us with our
No.
caregivers. It was, and that is what I'm trying to share with, what I'm realizing more is, yes, we're teaching your children these principles, but actually, how does it show up for you? What are your feeling visitors? And as I often say as well, like with the like you said, that feeling, and what's it, it's trying to give you information, it's trying to tell you something. So that disappointment or the anger, but what's under the anger? Because anger is also hiding something else, is it the fact that I feel insecure? Is it that I feel threatened? Is it that I feel disappointed, whatever that might be? There's a, what's the, is a boundary being overstepped, is a value not being met? And it's always a fear-based emotion there as well, isn't it? It's but it's and that, sometimes I don't know about, I find that initially when starting this, because I can imagine, how do I do this? And we've not ever been taught how to do this. It is a real skill. But sometimes I encourage parents to journal on previous times that they did react and respond, and really go back and think, okay, well, what was going on for me? How did that feel? What was actually under, and like you said, that resistance, and what was actually going on underneath that? But and because it feels so counterintuitive, right? Oh, it's not it's not always easy.
Yeah, our minds are telling us that we've got to do something to make something better. And most of the
Yes.
time, I'm trying to teach this to my daughter. She's only 3.5. She does
Yeah.
not have a prefrontal cortex, that's for sure. Or not a well developed one. She's clever, but not a well developed
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex when it comes to emotions, at least. Her
Yeah.
amygdala takes charge straight away.
Mm,
And she we've been talking a lot about how, like, let's say we're at the playground and some other kid is on the swing and she really wants to swing and she's getting upset, or she's going up there, or she asks for a turn and the other kid's like, no, I just want to be on the swing. And or someone
mm,
bumps into her and doesn't say sorry and she's upset that they didn't say sorry, or whatever it is. Okay, well, first thing, she can at least identify what's making her upset. I think
yeah.
that's a powerful thing.
Mm,
But the
mm,
second part is just helping her see that that kid's not going to be on the swing forever. Maybe instead of
mm,
saying what we have to do, like, what do I have to
mm,
do? Because that implies that you have to do something. Instead,
mm.
just take a step back and just recognize, well, do I have to do anything? Like,
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
have to take action here? Or can I just
Yeah.
simply just watch and see what happens? And if you do that for long enough,
Mm.
the kid's eventually going to get off the swing, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think as well, something that struck to my mind here as well is also what you, no pressure, but what you are modeling, right?
Mm,
Because it's also how are we responding? What are we modeling to our children when we're anxious, when we're impatient, when we are, because they see that. And I mean, yes, there's developmental things there as well with her in terms of not quite understanding the processes of sharing, and you know what I mean? Like, it's still quite self-centered of, but I want that, so I should be on that. Like, there's those elements as well, still in terms of developmental wise. But the more she's seeing you model the patience, the calmness, and listen, listen, listen. Like, we've all got feelings, right? It's like, I don't ever, it's tough, especially I think, like, you do your work in meditation and so forth, but I'm thinking of some of the parents that I supported. This is all new. This is all new, and it can feel incredibly disheartening when you feel like you're just getting it wrong, because it feels so hard. But I think a good question to ask ourselves is also, what am I modeling to my child? Because over time, if she's always seeing you, and you're a human, but if she's seeing you being patient, waiting, all of those skills, that is something that she'll adopt as well, because that's what they see. And it is that phrase of, they don't do what we tell them to do, they do what they see. So it's even things like, how we speak to others, and how do we tolerate stress and frustration. And I can see that evident in my own life. I mean, my parents did a fantastic job. They did the best that they could, but quite reactive. And it's something I've really had to work on. Of like, no, but I don't have to react. But they didn't know any better. And they weren't given the support either. So it's not, it's their fault. They did the best they could. But it's, yeah, I mean, gosh, yeah, it's so much around self-awareness and, as you're saying, and also then obviously modeling and having these conversations with your daughter too. And it's continuous, right? It's not like, right, it's one thing, now we're done, you're sorted.
I
It's like
sorted out at 3 years old. I don't need to help her with the
done.
development anymore. Sorted. Done my job. I'm out.
Done it.
No, even like after the Julie King episode, how to talk so kids will listen, so little kids will listen. My mum called me up. She listens to all my podcast episodes. I think she's my biggest fan.
I love
really,
it.
really nice.
Yes.
And she called me up saying, "Oh, you're so lucky. There's so many resources for you right now, and there are just so many resources. You can see them all. And it's just so much easier for you now than what it was in the past." And I mean, but to anyone who's listening to this, don't let that be a thing that makes you judge yourself for your parenting style.
Yeah.
Let that be an opportunity. Like, look, there's Natalie Costa here. You can learn from her. Listen to this. Like, there's some really cool stuff which is here. Learn how to improve yourself as a parent. Like, don't let the it's too hard basket or the self-judgment kind of get a hold of you, right?
Yeah, and I think really focus on that self-judgment. That's, that self-compassion piece is so, so important. I mean, and again, self-compassion, it's not modeled either. It wasn't modeled to me as a child. In fact, it was the opposite, and I think I just think that that's something else that might feel very counterintuitive as well. But am I not being weak? How do I even speak kindly to myself? Like that's why I'm always saying you're learning with your child, and it it is right. It is about, okay, because awareness there is key as well. What is my inner chatter? What is the story that I'm telling myself? And it doesn't necessarily mean we flip to the positive story. That's not what I'm not a fan of that. But let's just realistically unpick this. Is it really 100% true that I'm a failure as a parent because my child doesn't listen to me? Is that 100% true? Of course it's not. I mean, and we know, like, we often speak kinder to the people that we love versus to ourselves. But it is recognizing, look, this is tough. And okay, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a bad parent. I notice, like, I love that as well. Like, I notice, because that kind of just separates you from the thought a little bit, and that's something I use as well. And another phrase is as well, no wonder this is hard. I often share that with parents, and I use myself, no wonder I just flipped my lid at my child because I've been up since 4 a.m. I haven't, slept properly. I've got a million and one things to do. No wonder this is tough. But that doesn't mean I'm a bad parent. I'm still a good parent. And the good news is, if somebody's listening to this, you now have an opportunity for a do-over. So we can always go back and apologize. You can always go back and model what you could have done. The apology factor is huge. And again, but grown-ups didn't really apologize to kids when I was a child, right? So, and I think that that's just as important. And it's showing our children, how do I own when I don't always get it right, and I'm learning as well, and this is what I'm doing, and that's just as valuable. Which I think, is again, how do we model apologizing and owning our mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, but what you're essentially saying is focus on your own personal development first before you start saying, before you say my kids have to change. First, start asking yourself, how do I have to change?
Yeah. And in terms of along doing that, then as well, there are things that we can do to support our children, that they can learn these habits, but not expecting that it's them that needs it. It starts with us. I mean, having children is the biggest personal development, reflective work I think you can ever do, because it's always showing you where you can grow, and it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Having kids, then marriage second, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're pretty close to each other. All right. So you mentioned quite a few times about development of like a child development or mental development.
Mm,
Are you able to share a little bit about that? Because I mean, a lot of people listening, or at least what I've heard in the past, is that people are very resistant to this idea that uh, no, kids aren't ready for it. It's like no, they should be ready for it, or like your kid just literally is not developed enough yet to be able to
mm,
self-regulate. Don't expect them to. Stop
mm,
expect like just to manage your own expectations on what you actually expect your kid to
mm,
be able to and not be able to do. Are you able
mm.
to share that development? And I'm guessing probably starting from around 2 years old, which is when most parents run into these types of challenges.
Yeah, I think, it's, there's so much going on in their brain. I think a key thing to remember is, like, we've touched on that, is that higher level thinking part of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, um, which, I often say to children, it's the boss of you. It's your CEO. It helps us with our thinking, our planning, problem solving, to have that sense of rationality, to pay attention to detail, to frustration tolerance, as we've spoken about, to be able to inhibit certain emotions or motivate myself when I don't want to do things. Um, the flexibility there as well, metacognition, being aware of what I'm thinking about, being aware of my thoughts. That part of the brain isn't fully, like we said, fully developed until at least our mid 20s. Whereas that emotional hub of the brain, the more, the primitive part of the brain, where the amygdala is housed as well, that houses those big reactive emotions, that fight, flight, or freeze response, that's very well developed within our children. And so when they're caught up in these big emotions, they're stuck in that feeling, and they don't have this rationality or sense of perspective, all the things that we have to be able to work through these big feelings. And of course, there's other factors there in terms of, you know, b b different developmental stages in terms of, more self, children are obviously younger, a lot more self-centered, and that empathy and compassion and all of that also starts to develop at a later stage. Abstract thinking develops a little bit later on as well. Um, but your child simply doesn't, I think a key thing, to keep it really simple for parents, and is that your child doesn't see the world through a fully developed brain. They see the world through that emotional brain. And then as well, if we're looking at tweens and teens, there's so much brain development going on there with the neural restructuring and the pruning and the rewiring and the hormones that come into play as well. And so they are also going through, I've often said to parents, it's the brain that we're dealing with. It's not personal. Like if a child says things, it's the brain and how they're seeing the world and processing their emotions, because of how the brain's developed. That logical, rational thinking brain isn't fully developed yet. And it's understanding that, and I do find that once parents understand, okay, actually, this is still, it doesn't take the challenge away, it doesn't make it any less, but I'm seeing the world. And the other thing we have to remember is we are seeing the world and the problems that our children face with our lived experience. For the number of years we've been on this planet, everything we've been exposed to. In your child's world, the fact that they can't drink from the blue cup is a very big deal. A, because, like I said, that rational part's not fully developed yet. But B, as well, their lived experience, their little world, they don't have all the insights and the force, experiences that we have as well. Um, and I think that's just really important to remember. And I think a phrase, that's not my phrase, and I don't actually know where it might have come from Dr. Daniel Siegel, but I don't want to put any words on it. But that it's, they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. So remembering that they're having a hard time in those feelings. They're not doing this on purpose. And also, when they do have that behavior, see that as a window to, okay, what's underneath that behavior? What is that behavior actually trying to tell me? What is under, is it the disappointment? Of course, and we've all felt that before. I mean, coming off playstations or games is a big thing for many families. And if we think about that's frustration tolerance, it's also transitioning from one activity to another. So both of those executive functioning skills. Now we've also thrown in the fact that we've put them on a game, and no judgment here of games, because it's technology is here to stay. We need to embrace it, but we also have to understand it. And, if we think about gaming, it's addictive. It's little dopamine hits all the time. And it's really challenging, but it's a fun challenge because I'm going to get to level 2 and I will get to level 3. Whereas, challenges in real life, it's not always guaranteed you're going to get to level 2 and level 3. So it's really addictive. And now you're pulling me away from that. When have we felt like that? Where we've been so engrossed in something and then it's like, no, we felt that, frustration, that whatever it might, that irritation, the, don't, I still want to finish this, let me carry on. So it's understanding it's that the emotion is tenfold for them because of where they're at developmentally. And once we know that, we can manage our expectations and then maybe problem solve and put some things into place to help us with that.
You're talking about this idea of lived experience. And so things which we can see as small, even if they had the exact same functionality, like the exact same brain development standard as what we have as, parents in our 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever, that we have there. Even if they still had that, they haven't had the experience of what something major actually means, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I think I heard Julie King share this example, but like, it's not such a, like, you might think it's not a big deal for your kid that there's no more granola bars left. It's okay,
Yeah.
there are no more granola bars. That's fine. No more granola bars. Like, it's not such a big deal. But your kid's throwing a tantrum over, I want granola bars, I don't want anything else, blah, 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 right? And you're like, well, the kid should just accept that it's not such a big deal, right? And then they approach the conversation that way, and obviously that doesn't help.
Mm.
And the flip side to that is then say, okay, well, what about to an adult? And they're saying, and you start saying to them, oh, so you tried to get your car serviced and to get it fixed, and they charged you the full amount, and it broke down a week later, and then they're refusing to fix it for you unless you pay a whole lot more money. No, come on, it's not such a big deal. Like, come on, this stuff
Yeah.
happens. It's like, oh, so you were late to work because of it as well? Oh, it's not such a big deal. Get over it. Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
And as most people were like, what? No way. Like, how could you possibly see me in that way? You're not being compassionate or empathetic or whatever. How can you be saying that this is all my
Yeah.
fault? And
Mm.
that's most likely exactly what our kids are feeling as well, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. That, that's how I explain it to parents as well. It's the experience doesn't have to make sense to us, but we just have to let our children know that I understand this is hard for you and I'm here for you and you're not alone. Like I get this is hard. I believe you. I know this is difficult. It makes sense. Rationally, it's like it makes no sense why they're having a moment about the pink cup, right? It makes no sense. But I get that it's hard for you. I believe you. And that's it, because it's that validation, right? And the minute somebody does that, we feel okay. I'm allowed to, like, it's okay for me to feel this feeling, and I'm not alone in this feeling. And I often say to parents, it's similar to the analogy, the example you shared there. But if we're really caught up or upset about something and it's unfair or it's unjust, and we tell someone else and they say, oh, but it's not a big deal, just calm down. Just calm down. It's not, I mean, we know
Just
and we're seeing it, right?
relax, will you?
Oh,
Just
relax.
relax.
Oh, that's the worst thing, right? It doesn't work. But why doesn't it work? Because you don't feel heard, seen, and understood. And we all want to feel seen, heard, and understood. Even though it doesn't make sense, and it still doesn't make it right that you punched your brother in the face. That is not right. But I get why you were so angry because he took the iPad off you. I understand. So we're understanding the feeling. And that's the first thing. Because if we can connect to the feeling first, that starts to lower that, because now there's not that resistance, because it's like, oh, okay, somebody gets how I feel. And then from there, it's then easier. It will still sometimes be a challenge, but it's then easier to move into the problem solving or whatever, moving forward, versus coming in with, and don't feel like this and all of that, because we know that that doesn't work.
Yeah, no crying in my house. That's not
No
allowed.
crying.
um, so what? And I think we're getting close towards the end of our conversation, but
Mm,
I'm really curious about what are your conversations with parents? So let's just say that someone came to you wanting some help with their kids, right? And
mm.
they're like the kids have tension, whatever it is, right? What's the first thing that you ask them? Like, what's the first part of that conversation?
Oh, good question. I first want to find out what's going on for them. tell me, what is it that they're finding hard? What is the challenge? I want to get an insight into their world and understand what is it that they're struggling with. Um, because from there we can, every person, every family is different. So with some families it's anxiety, with some it's the anger, with some it's the um separation anxiety. At a stage, there was a case of a lot of children struggling with going to school just after COVID. That was a big thing for, that wouldn't be not seen as normal for the age of the children, normally like reception nursery. But I think for me, it's first understanding what it is. I want to try and get into the world of the parents and understand what it is that they're struggling with. And also, not just what they're struggling, in terms of the challenges they're having with their child, but what are they finding hard within themselves. That's that's one of the important things, is what's going on for you. So right, you've told me about your child and what you want them to do and what you're struggling with them, but actually, okay, how are you dealing with that? How is that showing? And I always like compassion. I'm like, look, this is not to like tell you off, you should or should. I just want to know, because we're only doing the best we can in the moments that we have with the tools that we have. So the more I know, then that will guide, that will make it, I'll be more helpful in that capacity. But it's
And
just
then
as
what's
important
next?
knowing one. And then I guess it depends on. I mean, typically we always go into helping them understand the brain, because, and the thing is, like, this is the world I'm in, so I sort of like, but everybody knows this, everybody knows, but actually not everybody knows this, and parents are busy, and it's, I'm not saying not, of course, a lot of parents know this, but it's really helping them begin to see the world from their child's perspective and the world from their child's view. And if I'm working with children, we also start with the brain. We also learn about the thinking brain and the feeling brain and our body signals and what happens when I feel my big feelings, and that there's nothing wrong with my big feeling there, but I don't need to, it doesn't need to be in power. There are some things that I can start to do to help me work through that feeling. We also then look at, if it is, say, anger, because that's a topic. I mean, it is a topic that comes in all conversations, but let's look at what's underneath that anger. How does anger manifest itself for you? How does it manifest itself for your child? With children, we look at what hides underneath the angry mask. And the different feeling visitors, because those feeling visitors are giving us information. Um, and that also provides a really good scaffolding for parents and children to start talking about what's hiding under tornado in those big feeling moments or after the big feeling moments. Something else we also spend time on is exploring the stories we tell ourselves, all those little quick thoughts, those negative thoughts, those the inner critic thoughts, the all of those negative thoughts. And I do that with parents and with children. And obviously it might look slightly different, but also recognizing what are these thoughts I have of, I'm a bad parent, or I can't cope, or how dare you talk to me like that. And then actually what's underneath that. And are we catastrophizing? Am I being making this personal, all about me? Is there a judgment that I fear from mothers? So a lot of the inner work with parents, but then equally with children, we also look at their negative thoughts, the automatic negative thoughts, and begin to help them start to get into the habit of, oh, okay, that belongs to my unwelcome visitor. So that thought, I'm terrible at this, or I'm so stupid at this. Oh, that belongs to butt brain. One of the boys called his butt brain, and I thought that was a brilliant way for his inner critic. And beginning to look at strategies to challenge and reframe that. And of course, then throughout these conversations with parents, things will come up in terms of the specific challenges they're facing, whether it is, morning routines or siblings or, specific things to them. But it's about supporting both parents and children and giving them all a common language on how they're communicating with each other about feelings. We often talk about power zones and power breathing and move it to lose it, and all these, like, also teach, a big part that I do with children is teaching them what happens in their brain when they make mistakes and get things wrong. And then our brain is literally like a muscle. So we look at what the neurons look like in the brain and how it makes more connections. And we make brain cells from pipe cleaners and, to go make more friends for Bob. And that means I'm doing difficult things. Um, and, reframing challenge, mistakes and challenges as well. Within your challenge, there is a hidden power. Let's find it. And so giving parents and children, like I said, those tools, so there's a common language they can communicate with each other. Um, So yeah, that kind of takes the program, I guess, in a nutshell for you.
Yeah, no, that sounds very powerful as well. And as I was hearing that, I suspect there's a voice which is going off in some of the listeners' minds, going, so that's great. I can help my child sit with their emotion. I can sit with my own emotions, whatever. But I still need to get stuff done. I still
Yeah.
need things to happen. I still can't have my kids screaming at me when I'm at the grocery store. I still can't
Mm,
be late for every single meeting that I'm always doing. Those
mm,
types of things, which I'd imagine would
mm,
come up a lot.
mm,
Uh,
mm.
what would you say to someone who hears that? It's like,
Yeah.
especially if they're coming from the frame of, um, my child should, my child's worse than other kids or whatever, right? Like so and so, or their
Yeah.
cousin who's the same age doesn't act that way, or whatever, that kind of stuff. What would
Mm,
you, like,
mm,
what would you say there? Like,
mm,
what's your response to someone who's asking those
mm.
types of questions?
Yeah, so I'd say first of all, if you that should reframe that should to skill. My child should listen to me. My child should leave the house on time. My child still needs to develop the skill of being organized to leave the house on time. My child still needs to develop the skill of tolerating working through his big feelings because he can't get this toy that he wants in the store, right? Because remember, these are skills that we're teaching our children. The other thing as well is, and I often say to parents, start with one situation that is a challenge, like if it's morning routines, right? And understand, we're not going to be here forever. You're not going to be stuck. There are going to be days, there's going to become a time where you're like, I wish I had my morning challenge with my child because I just want them to come and visit me, right? I'm just saying, like, have a sense of perspective, like, because I get it. In the moment, it is overwhelming, but okay, if mornings are a challenge, how can I make mornings a little bit easier for me and my family? Whether that even means, okay, I maybe have to get up 20 minutes before. Remember, we're not going to be here forever. We're not going to be here forever. But those 20 minutes, will those 20 minutes give me a little bit of leeway so that I'm not feeling as stressed and pressured? And the other thing I also like to do with children is bring them in, help them in the decision making process. It doesn't mean I have to come up with all the answers and you do what they say. But one of the triggers for children is my agency bucket's not full. And I mean, children are told what to do left, right, and center, right? And it's everything. So actually, if we can bring them in, and again, I'm not saying this works all the time, but it does work many times, is okay, do you know what, Johnny? Mornings are tough, aren't they? I get shouty, daddy gets shouty, you get shouty, we go to school and everybody's in a bad mood. Doesn't feel good, does it? Now, how do you think we can solve this challenge together? I know you've got some good ideas, and basically you want to try and get there on the same team. We've got this challenge. It's you and me versus this challenge versus instead of me versus you, right? And I did recently with a family that they were struggling with their boys getting them off of screen times, and they had and obviously you're not doing this in the big feeling moment. You're having like a family meeting about this. Or you're having a nice activity. Or, it's when we're all calm, and coming up with some ideas. Okay, well, what can we do? What to manage our expectations here? And I also, children are very visual. Now, I don't know about, I know, remember back in my days as a teacher, like the timetable would be up on the board, like it's assembly, then it's maths, then it's this. So with little ones, at least, I get them to draw their visual timetable. And then as they do it, they either, tick it off or they put a sticker on it. So it's like, okay, I've done that. I've done that. I've done that. Like there's that sense of progress that they can see, but there's that sense of autonomy as well. So if some of these suggestions in the morning routine comes from them, it's like, well, what I say and do matters as well. Um, and then, I think a big part of well is it's also the conversations we're having before. So if mornings are difficult, setting that up the night before as well. What can we do the night before that might make the morning a bit easier? And definitely give yourself more time. I mean, I read somewhere, it takes children roughly 90 minutes to kind of get ready and get out of the house in the mornings on time, for little ones. And obviously, that's not a blanket one, but it takes them so much longer. And children are so in the moment as well. So if they're playing their game, like they have no concept of getting ready in 5 minutes. So remember, this is a skill. Okay, how can we help them develop the skill? With one family, and again, it doesn't work with all, but they used music. So they used songs, and they're like, by the time this song is done, you've got your teeth brushed and you're downstairs. And that, for a while, that worked, and it was, they then played the song. When the song's finished, we're going to be standing by the door, and they gamified it a little bit. Another dad, that I worked with, him and his daughter would do, like, they had to come up with two silly dance moves as she was brushing her teeth. Now, I totally understand these things take time, but my challenge is the time's going to pass in any case. It's still going to pass. And so by doing these little things, initially it takes time, but it builds that connection. And actually, more connected our children feel to us, the less that resistance is also not going to be there that much. So it's long, but the long run becomes the short run, and then you're even more connected.
I was I was smiling as you were sharing that. I've had some wonderful decision making conversations with
Mm,
my daughter, which have been a lot of fun, um, but and very rewarding as well. But more recently, I my I went my wife and I sat down with our daughter when she was nice and calm. She was about 3.5, and we asked her, we can see that you get really upset when these types of things happen. Maybe it's a baby sister taking something from her or whatever it
mm,
is. We can see you get really upset, and we don't really would love to see you happy and enjoying yourself and having a lot of fun. What can we do? What can mummy and daddy do to help it to help you feel get happier sooner afterwards, or to
mm.
stop you from even getting upset? She said, Daddy, next time that I get really upset, you need to take deep breaths. I'm like, oh no, swallow my freaking medicine. I'm like, wait, you want me to take deep breaths? Yes, Daddy, you take deep
I
breaths.
love it. I love it. I love it. And you see, and it's about holding space, isn't it?
Mm,
It's not about getting rid of it or fixing. And I totally understand from the parent, from your side, but we just want her to, be happy.
yeah.
Like, what can we do? You're trying to help her. What can we do to help you? But we
Mm-hmm.
also have to understand, with children, they will have big feelings because that's how they're learning to express their emotions.
Yeah.
Um, and it's us holding space. And yeah, take deep breaths. I love that.
Take
Wise words from a
take
3.5-year-old. I love that.
my goodness. What am I teaching her? Damn
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. What I'll do now is I'll summarize the key points from our conversation.
Okay,
You have the opportunity to correct
cool.
anything which I might have said wrong, or add something which you feel like I might have missed out, um, or ask me to remove something. Say, hey, I didn't want you to talk about that. Let's take it out. Um, but when we're talking about how you actually define success, the key part, like the main part for you, is about how you're making an impact, but then also about
Yeah,
how you're being more present with
yeah,
others in your life.
yeah.
So from more of a
Mm,
career perspective, you see the making an
mm,
impact and basically the
mm.
work you're doing with children and their parents and how that improves their parents' lives and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And then from a personal perspective, it's more of how much longer is my family going to be around for? How can I
yeah.
be more present with the people who are in
Mm,
my life?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And you don't want to be that person on their deathbed going,
No.
"Oh, I should have worked more. That's what I should have done. I should have worked even more."
Even
Uh,
more.
so basically, you grew up in SA in South Africa.
Mm,
You were motivated to get good grades. You're a people pleaser. You've kind of had no idea what you wanted to do. Decided to go into to
yeah,
study teaching, and you went to psychology degree alongside, and you did your honors there as well because you kind of didn't even want to work, and
yeah.
you kind of had a tough adjustment to teaching, and you're like, this isn't it. This isn't it. What am I passionate about? This doesn't tick
Mm,
all the boxes. It's fun, but not really.
yeah,
And then you ended up going back. You had a bad breakup, and you went back to South Africa. You licked your wounds, and a friend kind of nagged you to come along again. And so you went
yeah,
off, and you found another school. Still something was missing. You love fitness and teaching now. You started learning how to speak to parents, to adults, and you really enjoyed that as well. But it's not it yet. And then you
yeah.
did a life coaching course by complete chance, and you got qualified in performance coaching, and you were doing that. And this isn't it yet either. And started talking to stressed out kids about
Yeah,
what's happening in their mind, and you're like, this is it, and I can do this. This is amazing. And you had the flexibility to be able to speak to whatever um, uh, kids were available on your roster because you didn't have
mm,
your own class, and you
mm,
started Power Thoughts on the side while also doing some tutoring. And your first client was someone on the other side of the world. It was because there are no parenting coaches here in Australia. How can you help me from your UK newspaper? And now it's about, for yourself, it's about supporting parents as much as it is about
Mm,
supporting the kids as well.
yeah.
And you had like these major decisions about moving across, and it was kind of like you knew you wanted to pursue something, but you also wanted your safety net. And so anyone who's listening to this
Mm,
who's trying to start up a side hustle, it doesn't have to be go all in and
yeah.
have fear as your driver. It can also just be doing the smoother route.
Mm,
And that was, and then eventually it got to a teacher, the new principal saying, no, you can't stay here part-time, full-time or
mm,
nothing. You're like,
mm.
okay, nothing. I got to
Nothing.
get out. That was fear, which was driving you. You're saying you're not driven by fear, but that was
Yeah,
definitely fear
that
driving
was
it, right?
fear. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, so yeah, it definitely was. I just, yeah, couldn't.
Yeah. And so in hindsight, you're telling you'd wish you told yourself, don't worry so much. Maybe start a
Mm,
little bit sooner if you could, but just know it's all part of the journey, and just be a little bit
mm,
more willing to accept the unknowns.
mm,
And then you started having schools and start asking you to speak to parents and also to staff as well. And
mm,
then your private clients are building up, and then you did a corporate workshop and you're helping lawyers about their kids and
mm.
that kind of stuff as well. And COVID helped more with the build up in what companies were wanting. I still think COVID's recent, but it's like
It
three,
is.
4 years ago, right?
Yeah, it is. I feel like we're kind of carrying on like it's not, but it's still the hangover when we didn't touch on that, but like there's definitely still a hangover of it,
Right.
100%. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so basically, your primary focus has been working through emotions and regulating feelings.
Mm,
And so we started exploring a little bit more about how you get kids to listen to you specifically, how parents can get kids to
mm,
listen as well, and a lot of it kind of just comes down to all the tantrums, the anger, the meltdowns, the crying, the all of it is just because they don't have their prefrontal cortex developed yet. They're,
mm,
they're still in
mm.
their amygdala. They've still got their
Yeah,
limbic system that's just kind of overriding all of it. They're not
totally.
there yet.
Yeah.
And so if we want to talk about having more empathy for our kids, we've got to talk about managing our expectations of our kids as
Mm,
well.
mm,
And
mm,
so you were sharing basically there's this education piece, but also like how do we have empathy and compassion when we're communicating in
mm.
a different way to basically meet where they are first.
Yeah,
And that children want boundaries. They want autonomy, but they also want boundaries because it makes them
yeah,
feel safe. So how can you give
yeah.
them both? And basically we spent the majority of the time talking about how you help
Mm,
parents and how you explore these different
yeah,
areas and focusing on the judgment, the self-judgment of the parent and the judgment of the child, and looking within your body and trying to understand what the
yeah.
emotions are, and kind of just work out, well, what's actually going on for you as the parent.
Mm,
So if you're a parent
mm,
listening to this, like what's going on for you yourself,
yeah,
and
yeah.
what's the actual challenge with your child?
Mm,
Is
mm,
get them getting angry an actual challenge, or is there something else which is causing some
mm,
fear within you?
mm,
And then start
mm.
to educate about seeing the world from the child's perspective, and then
Yeah.
try to see it as an opportunity to see what's underneath the emotion. What's the like
Mm,
you kept referring to? What's the information that's giving us?
yeah,
And
yeah.
then make it real and understood. And then
Mm,
you shared a pretty cool tip, or just a language reframe, basically from my kid should be able to
oh yeah.
something to my kid needs to develop the skill to.
Mm, mm.
And maybe the yet is very powerful as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, 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 yeah.
my child my child can't do this, or my child's useless
Yes.
on their own.
Yeah.
My child can't handle all of this themselves
Yeah,
yet.
yet. Yeah, yeah,
Yet.
that's just as good. Yeah, that's really powerful.
And so, and then, yeah, when you see a common challenge come up, it's not going to be permanent. So set yourself up for success.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
expect the morning routines to just get easier on their own. Set it
yeah,
up, make it easier.
yeah.
So that's what I got from you in this conversation. Is there anything which you wanted to correct or adjust or add
No,
to, or?
that was all good. That was really good. I love the questions. Really deep. Feels like I just have a therapy right now. It was really good. And everything you got there, I absolutely loved it. Really good questions. You're a very good listener. Like brilliant. So yeah, you're really, I'm
Thank
not that
you.
I expect like, I've had some conversations with people and it can feel quite scripted. And this just
Mm,
felt like it was a, flowing conversation. So
thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Is there anything else which you want to share with people? Is there any, maybe even if it maybe a nice trigger for this conversation is if there is advice that you could give to your
Mm.
younger self?
Yeah.
or advice to someone else that you've been helping out who's younger, or someone who's just about to start being a parent, like they're pregnant and they're expecting,
Yeah.
what advice would you love to give to them?
So two pieces. I think definitely really start to focus on that internal chatter and start to be your own inner champion, no matter how awkward it feels. But that self-compassion piece is really, really important because having that compassion for ourselves is going to help us to move forward with more resilience to get back up again versus if we're beating ourselves up and you know having a really tough time on ourselves and understanding. And along with that self-compassion piece, just know that you are a learner on this process. You don't need to know all the answers. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, and you are learning with your child as they grow. I think that really is the important thing. And one other thing that I also want to touch on is, yes, you've got all these amazing parenting experts, but I also feel that for parents, you are still that don't let go of that gut instinct that a parent has. Because I think sometimes we can get drowned out by, but this person said this person said this, and actually really tune into what's your gut instinct saying. I think that that's a really important thing to notice as well. Take that what works for you, because I think we're all different and there's no one size fits all. So yeah, that would be my piece of advice.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Appreciate your
Brilliant.
time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So I hope you received a whole lot of value from engaging in that conversation. What were the key takeaways for you? What can you schedule in your life right now to make sure that the time you just invested into listening to this exceptional conversation with this amazing mentor and this amazing individual is time that wasn't misused, but was time that you've allocated properly to enhancing your life and improving it? Whatever it is, schedule it now, practice it now, be the successful person you're meant to be, live with purpose.